Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel, former commander of UK's and NATO's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ukraine has destroyed 4 Russia's Su-34 fighter jets in Russia's region of Volgograd using deadly drones. This operation has been carried out by special forces and Ukrainian security service. What is your reaction to this another operation deep inside Russia?
Well, I think it's another very significant operation. We talked about Operation Spiderweb a few weeks ago, which was a similar type of operation deep into Russian territory to destroy strategic assets. And yet again, that's what Ukraine's done. These aircraft are strategic assets, very, very important to the Russian war effort, very expensive and very difficult to replace. And I think it's just showing that how it's obviously not easy. An awful lot of time and effort, intelligence, and very brave activity has gone on to do this. But the fact that Ukraine still keeps managing to attack deep into Russia is very impressive from the perspective of those of us supporting Ukraine. I think for the Russians, it must be a blow. I mean, we've only seen the American strike on Iran 2 weekends ago, where American bombers traveled right the way around the world, dropped bombs on Iranian nuclear weapons sites, which were all protected by Russian air defense missiles, by Russian aircraft. And these American aircraft got there and back without the Russians even knowing. So I think it is a sort of a message for what is really happening in the Russian military, that they might still have thousands of young men to throw into the front line, but when it comes to protecting their strategic assets like these aircraft, the aircraft that were destroyed on Spiderweb, they're really failing. And although we know that the front lines are pretty static at the moment, Ukraine really does seem to be making some deep inroads and having some strategic impact by these sort of strikes that are now happening on a regular basis. And it must be a real, that we know that the Iranian attack really rumbled Kremlin, that their air defense doesn't work. And again, this is another indication.
Also, do you feel that Ukrainian Spiderweb operation has already changed the game in this fight? Because it seems like now Ukraine starting to use new tactics to destroy enemy's aircraft deep inside Russia, like with these 4 Russia's Su-34 fighter jets, which were already destroyed by Ukrainian drones.
Well, I think this is probably the stage at the war that we're at now. To develop these deep intelligence networks over Russia must be incredibly difficult and complex. I mean, one thing it does show is that there are a lot of people in Russia who support Ukraine, because there's no way they could do this on their own. But it takes time. We just have to look back to the Second World War and the development of the Special Operation Executive in France and elsewhere across Europe, working to attack the Nazis, doing similar sort of activities that the Ukrainian military, special forces and Ukraine security services are now doing in Russia. So I think it takes an awful lot of time. Although these attacks are over in a matter of minutes, if not hours, the planning takes months, if not years. So I think it is a very smart move by the Ukrainian government to attack this, because it is something, there are, Putin cannot replace these fighters. He can throw as many young men as he likes into the meat grinder, the Donbass, but he can't replace these fighters. And now that Ukraine forces have got so adept at it, I mean, it is something I think that, that has been replicated elsewhere and looked at. Even the British Strategic Defence Review, announced a few weeks ago, really has a nod to what's happening in Ukraine, the sort of operations Ukraine military is doing, and Britain is sort of realizing that it must do the same. So I think these are very significant and very, very important attacks. and will be of a deep concern in the Kremlin. Because, I mean, one of the final bit on this, Daniel, if the air defense in Moscow doesn't work, all those generals huddled in the Kremlin who have been assassinated as well must be getting increasingly worried. So a very smart move, but these things take a heck of a lot of time and effort to execute.
Let's also cover situation in the Russian army. More than 20,000 Russian soldiers have deserted from the front lines in Ukraine, according to the Russia's independent media outlet, Russian Media Zone. And also this publication was published again, information by the UK's Ministry of Defense. Isn't it another serious blow to Putin's war effort?
Well, it is very much, and I've written in the UK's Daily Telegraph only yesterday about the ineptitude of the Russian military. And these 20,000 people who are absent without leave, AWOL as we call it, is really an indication of the state of the Russian army. Even Russia has emptied all its jails and prisoners of the front line. They were very keen to come initially because they were getting pardons. Now they're not. They're just fighting. They're told to fight to the end of the war. And the Russian military is brutal. I mean, it always has been. The Red Army in the Second World War was absolutely brutal. When you look at casualty rates, the British military lost 350,000 soldiers and airmen and sailors in the Second World War. Russia has already lost over 1 million. I mean, that is just a staggering amount. And the fact that so many people are going AWOL, I mean, it's because, I think it's two things. It's because training and leadership. First of all, on the training front, these young men going to the front line get very little training, a week or two at most. Most of them don't even know how to clean their rifles. And after you fire a rifle for a few days, it comes clogged up with carbon and it won't work. But if you can't clean it, it's useless. And also, because they're so poorly trained, they can only sort of walk in a straight line. And it's a little bit the same with tank crews as well, not being trained. But when you come on to the leadership, Russian leadership has always been brutal. And there is a bullying culture within the Russian leadership, which leads to, the value of life is very low in the Russian army. And when you have a value of life like that, it doesn't tend to last long. In the British army, officers lead from the front and the soldiers follow. In the Russian army, it's sort of the other way around. The officers and some of the sergeants are behind, and any stragglers or deserters are shot. So the fact that 20,000 have gone AWOL from the front line is probably only showing a tiny bit of the story, because no doubt lots of them are being executed before they've got that far at all. So it is brutal. And the final bit to this is that brutality also breeds corruption. Really, since the First World War and through the Second World War, everybody has known how corrupt the Russian military is, with officers using soldiers almost as slaves, and with soldiers selling anything from ammunition to food to try and make some money. And when you get this sort of lack of discipline, which has been endemic, this is not new to the fighting in Ukraine. This has been the case all the time. But when you have a leadership like Putin, who has no care for casualties at all, you would have thought 1 million casualties, that they'd be rioting on the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and calling for Putin to withdraw. But they're not. A lot of people view Russian soldiers in Russia now as mercenaries, because they're all paid, in Russian terms, a lot of money, whereas most people in Russia barely have enough money to eat. But soldiers are considered wealthy, but not many of them actually live long enough to spend the money they earn. So I think, going back to your original question, the amount of deserters is systematic of really the failure of the Russian army. And now that the Ukraine forces are also destroying strategic assets like these aircraft we've talked about, what one can see that the Russian military is in a pretty sorry state. But Putin doesn't. He's quite happy to keep throwing young men into the meat grinder to keep this going, which is horrific. I mean, it is a crime against humanity. It's a war crime. And one day, hopefully, he will answer to those crimes.
Let's cover also another interesting information from Ukrainian military intelligence. A Russian soldier has killed and eaten his fellow service member, his comrade, on the front lines in Ukraine, according to the audio which has been intercepted by the Ukrainian military intelligence. This is another act of cannibalism in the Russian army, and Ukrainian military says that this is a further evidence of what is called the moral and psychological collapse of the Russian forces. Don't you think that this cannibalism should be a wake-up call for Vladimir Putin?
I mean, you would have thought so. I mean, it is just a shocking story, and apparently this person has been sent to 25 years in jail, which which seems a little punishment for what is a horrendous crime. And no doubt, the details are a little bit sort of hazy, but yeah, I think it shows the state of the Russian army, the fact that they are having to recruit these type of people to fight. And having been a soldier myself for 35 odd years of the battlefields of the world, you know that you actually need a strong moral compass in order to fight, in order to lead people to fight. But when you've got these gangsters, bandits, murderers, and now cannibals in your army, I would say it's little short of disintegration, and is yet another factor. Let's hope that people in Moscow, the civilians around Russia, are realizing quite what is being done in their name, and they raise up and try and end this dreadful war that Putin's got into, that's produced these horrific characters that you would expect only to see in the movies, but to see them on the front lines in Ukraine is just shocking.
Let's cover also situation on the ground in Ukraine. According to the latest analysis by The Telegraph, Russia's summer offensive is faltering, and Russian army has not yet achieved any kind of breakthrough despite its initial plans to capture the 4 regions of Ukraine, as Vladimir Putin ordered his army to do so. However, it seems like these advances have been stopped by the Ukrainian military. What is your assessment of this stage of Russia's so-called summer offensive?
I think the summer offensive has petered out and has really not gone anywhere. There's been very little movement on the front lines, really, for the last 12 months or so, let alone the last sort of few weeks and months. And I think it's systematic what we're talking about the Russian army. If you can only throw people into the meat grinder, it's unlikely that you're going to make any progress, because there's little training. There have been a few attacks mounted, but again, these attacks haven't been followed through, and have been easily kicked back by Ukrainian forces. So we know that the Russians have put a lot of effort in, or tried to put a lot of effort in, but actually it's been virtually no benefit at all, I don't think, to the Russians, except again to expose quite what a poor state the Russian army is at the moment, because they told us all winter they were planning this great offensive, they were concentrating forces somewhere, but then nothing happened, except Russians died in even greater numbers. So it strikes me that the conventional Russian military is pretty much, I mean, the military term is reached its culminating point, and otherwise it's run out of steam. And I don't think there's any likelihood that they're going to make any great progress, which is no doubt we've seen them stepping up their drone and missile attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine. But I think the hope now that NATO have had its summit, and that European countries are spending 5% on their defence, everybody's investing in defence, and NATO countries in Europe are being much more bellicose, much more demonstrative about their support to Ukraine and the desire to get the Russians out of Ukraine as much as possible. We wait to see what the president of the US, Donald Trump, does next. He's obviously heavily focused in the Middle East at the moment, where he can probably gain some success. Only today he's lifted all the sanctions in Syria. And no doubt at some stage, when he's finished with his domestic politics this week, he will turn his sights back on Ukraine. So things are getting teed up now, and I think eventually the tide really is turning in Ukraine's favour. And let's hope Ukraine gets enough support from European allies to be able to push that forward and force Putin to a ceasefire table to get a just peace for the people of Ukraine.
Also, recently, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has promised to scale back Russia's military spending in the future after Kremlin official warned about the risks of recession of Russian economy. Does it mean that Putin is starting to realize that his economy is in the brink of collapse?
Well, it's interesting. I think there are probably two things here. The economy, we know, has been in free fall and in a terrible position. And it's only been kept going by the oil that Putin has been able to sell on the open market, with the Iranian threats to close the Hormuz Straits and the price of oil not bouncing high as Putin had hoped. He's not really gaining enough money to be able to keep his war machine going and to scale back his military now. The only reason he's still in this fight is because the Russians have spent so much money on defense. If they're going to scale it back, I think that's a real indicator that, as the point I made earlier, that the Russian military has reached its culminating point. Let's hope it is a demonstration that Putin is beginning to realize that his special military operation is bound to fail. And let's hope that brings him to the ceasefire table and a just peace to Ukraine.
Also, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham says that for the first time, U.S. President Donald Trump has supported his bill on imposing tariffs and sanctions on Russian economy and on countries which buy Russian oil and gas. Trump told Lindsey Graham during a golf play that it's now time to move forward with this bill in Congress. Does it mean that the tide is turning finally in Ukraine's favor and against Vladimir Putin right now?
Well, it should do. Again, we've talked before of how important those American sanctions would be, and the frustration that Putin is prepared to put sanctions and tariffs on allies, but not on Putin. And if Putin can't sell his oil to the likes of China and India and can't get goods off them, he's going to very quickly run out of steam. So I think this is yet another indicator that the tide is turning. And let's hope that there are some people in the Kremlin who realize this, and let's hope that they force Putin to negotiate.
Let's also cover situation in the Middle East, and also Vladimir Putin's policies are U.S. has struck Iranian nuclear program and also has negotiated a quick ceasefire deal between Israel and Iran. Do you see this story as a story of success of the United States and big story of failure for Vladimir Putin, who failed to try to rescue, who failed to help his closest ally on the Middle East, Iran?
Yes, I think it is, absolutely. Iran was hoping that that Putin would come crashing over the hill with, air defense missiles and ammunition and equipment to support them against the Americans, the Israelis. The Russians did absolutely nothing. The only thing, beyond parody and irony, Putin offered to be the honest deal maker between Israel and Iran, but actually, this has been a success for Trump. I think he's certainly made a big dent in the Iranian nuclear program, and that's a really good thing. But also, he's negotiated a ceasefire between the two, which seems to be holding at the moment. So, yeah, this is a very big win, I think, for the White House, and a very big loss for the Kremlin. And as we said at the beginning, it's also a demonstration that Russian equipment against modern American equipment just doesn't stack up at all. And that must be a real concern for Russian military leaders and politicians, that they are very exposed.
Also, during this situation in the Middle East, the White House, US President Donald Trump, took a decisive stance on Iran and made decisive decisions to strike Iranian nuclear program. Don't you think that Kremlin fears such decisive decisions of the United States in Ukraine? And do you feel that this situation, these decisions to strike Iranian nuclear program, can also change Trump's thinking on Ukraine and could force Trump also, persuade Trump to take the same decisive decisions in Ukraine?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, it is a real demonstration of US military power. But I think we all know that the Israeli lobby in Washington and the White House is massive, and the Israelis and the Americans are probably the closest of allies. But it is a demonstration that America, if it does decide to flex its military muscles, can achieve some very strategic attacks like we saw in the various nuclear sites across Iran. So, yeah, let us hope that now President Trump has got a taste for success, that he wants to carry on and do the same in support of Ukraine.
Let's also cover additionally Vladimir Putin's. From your perspective, why didn't Putin help Iran during this confrontation between Iran and Israel? Was he too afraid of the possibility of the US retaliating against Russia, for example, in Ukraine, by providing more support to Ukraine in case of Russia's support to Iran?
Well, I think there is probably that. I think also that Putin couldn't do much. He hasn't got much spare kit at the moment. He's firing so many missiles and drones at Ukraine every day. A lot of them have come from Iran. He just hasn't got any spare military hardware to loan Iranians. They were obviously desperate for air defense weapons, but we know that Putin's been taking air defense weapons off the front line to protect himself and others in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg. So I think it was, when it came to the Ayatollah asking for support from Putin, he just turned out to be a paper tiger. There was nothing there, and actually nothing he could do. So, yeah, let's hope that galvanizes Trump to realize that actually, he is militarily and financially much, much more powerful than Putin and can make a real difference there. There are murmurings that Trump might be getting a Nobel Peace Prize, and that seems to be the main thing that's driving him at the moment. And quite frankly, if he manages to get a peace in Ukraine that is just and the Ukrainian people see as a fit one, then who would not want him to get some prize that means so much to him?
And final question for you: has the U.S. completely obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, as Donald Trump suggested, as he's confident about?
Well, I think that's very difficult to say, and there's so much information coming out about this. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who don't really know the wheres and wherefores and the complexities of making nuclear weapons, saying that they can make them tomorrow. I think that's not the case. I think the Iranian nuclear program has been massively damaged by this. And even if they have managed to recover some enriched uranium at 60%, it'll still take them a heck of a long time and effort to get it to a weaponized grade. And then there is a small problem of actually making a nuclear device. It's not just a question of strapping uranium onto the end of a missile. So, yeah, I don't think Iran's in a position to threaten with its nuclear capability anytime soon. And I would have thought it's months, if not years, the delay. And the reason I'm confident about this is it would appear that American and Israeli intelligence is so comprehensive in Iran. I'd be very surprised if the Iranian government could do much without the Americans knowing exactly what they're doing.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you for having me, and glory to Ukraine.